I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Albany Transportation Commission for January 25th, 2024. Can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Barnes.
Present.
Commissioner Javando.
Present.
Commissioner McCroskey.
Present.
Commissioner Peng.
Here.
Commissioner Vihia McClanahan.
Present.
Commissioner Von Nidingen.
Present.
And Chair Chomsky.
Present. I will read the land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. At this point in the meeting, we can take public comment on items that are not on tonight's agenda. Ed?
I guess I'll go first. Hi, good evening. My name is Jonathan Knight. I live on the 900 block of Santa Fe Avenue. And in a few, probably in the next couple of months, you'll be reviewing design concepts for traffic calming on 7 blocks in the city, including our block, the 900 block. And the current policy has a sort of prioritization of that, which will be based on the total number of cars going over 25 miles per hour. But the thing is, the whole process could take several years, as I think there's only funding for 1 or 2 traffic calming projects to be done each year. So I feel like the priority is quite important, and I wonder if there might be, what I'd like to suggest is a better way to prioritize. So for instance, if you look at UC Berkeley's transportation injury mapping system, which I'm sure you're familiar with, you'll see that of all of the blocks on the list, only one has had any injury accidents in the last 10 years, and that's the 900 block. We've had 4 injury accidents in the last 10 years. The others have had 0. We've also had a few non-injury accidents. A car flipped over on its roof a few years ago, and apparently no one was hurt, so it's not in the system, but those happen as well. And why is that? I think it probably is because of speeds. And so I sort of want to ask if you would be willing to look at some data, which I think you have available to you, and that would be from the speed surveys that were taken in 2022. And you've seen the data for total number of cars going over 25 miles an hour, but I hope that it would be easy to pull from that same data set numbers like the 85th percentile speed, which would tell you something about how fast cars are going, and maybe the 95th percentile to give you a sense of the truly elite speeders on the streets. And so I guess my request is just for the decisions about which streets to take care of first be based on data. I don't know where we'll come out in that, maybe not first, but however it comes out, I think that would be a great way to proceed rather than just the number of cars going over the limit, because they might only be going 26 or 27 miles an hour as opposed to 30, 35, 40 miles an hour, which is the kind of thing that I know we see on our road. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Do you have any observations about, like, to what degree the policy that the Commission has adopted legislates the priority that we put on blocks as opposed to leaving us room for discretion?
Prioritization was in terms of what goes into design. We haven't gotten to the point of having design for the blocks and needing to decide whether it's something that can be one project or will need to be phased, and there will need to be prioritization amongst that.
And does the adopted policy specify the prioritization, or is that something that the Commission or the Council can decide freely?
In terms of delivery, it would be capital project decision-making, so it would be going to Commission or Council.
Okay, and the policy doesn't dictate, the policy dictates which blocks are eligible, but the policy does not dictate what order they should be done in. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks. Is there any online public comment? Or Jeff, did you have?
Oh, no, I was just going to say that wanted to invite members of the public that are online to join, if you wish to address the commission on a matter that's not on the agenda, please use the raise your hand function in Zoom. And I am not seeing any hands raised.
Okay, let's move on to item 3-1, police data.
Due to vacation schedules, I don't have the data report this month, so I will present this information next month's meeting.
So let's move on to the consent calendar, which consists only of item 4-1. I would like to make a brief suggestion regarding the minutes, but does anyone else have any concerns about the minutes? Or any public comment about the minutes?
No.
My one thought about the minutes was they mentioned that the question arose about what kind of traffic violation constitutes the majority of citations. And in the minutes, it just says the question, doesn't really say the answer. I went back and looked at the video, and I think the answer was that staff would inquire, see if that information is available. So I will move to approve the minutes with that addition.
Second.
I guess voice vote, all in favor? Aye. Okay. Let's move on to item 5-1, AC Transit Realign Draft Final Plan. That's a nice little oxymoron there.
Thank you, Chair. So this item, apologies for the large amount of material that was in the packet. This was what was provided last Friday for the AC Transit Board, so I didn't really have time to much more than look through it and post it. But the presentation I'll give here will run through their presentation. I have had an opportunity to hear their presentation of this material, and will provide a little more detail on Albany-specific lines, and we'll go from there. The reason we wanted to turn this around quickly is Phase 3, the earlier two scenarios and an unconstrained scenario, was presented straight to City Council. And we had offered to do that again, but we had a window to provide the same information here at Commission before Council, but still within their engagement schedule. So I'll run through and provide some context on some of their slides. This goes through the phasing that they've been in their planning process, feedback from this last Phase 3 round of engagement, and the details on the draft service plan proposal. So this schedule is changing since last Friday's materials. The board did meet yesterday and chose not to set the public hearing per the schedule and to extend the planning for additional 6 months. So it may not go to council as we anticipate. Still, waiting to hear from AC Transit staff on what this means in terms of this round of engagement around this draft final plan.
So with that in mind, we have a long time to consider this topic. There's no longer a rush to have it on tonight's meeting in particular.
I think there's still merit in running through what they were proposing, and I can provide some context on what was discussed at their board, but I don't know. I assume there's going to be some additional review, and
Yeah,
where they go from there in the process is yet to be determined.
I guess my question is if we feel that tonight's agenda is full and we wanted to drop an item off it, it seems like this would be a good one to drop because we would have another opportunity to look at it. But if you feel that tonight's agenda is pretty manageable,
I think it's manageable, but if you'd like to take it in a different order to make sure, we could do that.
yeah, I like the idea of moving this toward the end, if we have time.
Sure, I move we move item 5.1 to the end after 5.4.
I second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry.
Was there anyone?
No. So you didn't call for discussion.
Oh,
So actually, this plan kind of sets up our number 5.3.
oh, well, good point.
Sorry I didn't get that out quickly.
Okay, let's see. As a matter of order, can we nullify the vote we just took and discuss?
I move to reconsider the vote to reorder the agenda.
Seconded.
Second.
Okay, and all in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Okay. That is a good point. We could just go in the designated order and trust that we'll get through it all. You prefer, if people prefer.
What are you worried about not getting to?
I guess nothing in particular.
Okay.
Just general time management concern, but
It doesn't look like we're going to have a lot of public comment tonight.
yeah. Okay. Well, I guess I'm happy to continue in the original order unless people have further thoughts about that. Okay. Sorry for the interruption. Please continue.
No problem. Okay, so in their last round of engagement through November and part of December, they came to cities, they did outreach at libraries, they did online and web-hosted forums, and so this is some of the numbers of their outreach through that 6-week window. Materials in print as well as on the website, and interactive mapping tool, and presentations, as I mentioned. In terms of feedback that they heard that they were working to incorporate in the draft final plan, they emphasized that they heard strong need for bus service that arrives when scheduled, strong overall support for increased frequency, but also a push to preserve coverage and make connections to essential destinations. And in terms of the specific feedback, really they felt that the message was, yes, we want frequent service, but not at the cost of reducing the coverage. In particular, they highlighted in the polling this difference in the red bar here between the balance scenario where opinions were sort of spread, and then a strong dislike, higher percentage in the frequent service ones. They identified in the presentation some specific comments that they called out. I'll note for Albany, there was a call out for line G adjustments that were under consideration that would have reduced its running down San Pablo through West Berkeley, that there were comments that should not happen. And there were other comments regarding the proposed changes for 72, which I can go into in a little more detail. So the time was in phase 4, setting the public hearings and doing this last round of input. That phase is now extended, so we'll await what that means in terms of their planning process. So in terms of the details of the plan they put forward this week, it built primarily on that balanced coverage scenario that looked to preserve the coverage rather than focus in on core high frequency. The main change that caused some big differences in this final draft plan compared to the two scenarios was direction they got to look at budgeting resources for additional runtime and layovers to really hit that reliability goal. So I'll probably mention this a couple times, but adding time to the lines to build in that reliability meant they had to take buses and operators away elsewhere to balance it out as cost neutral. So what they felt really was wanting to expand frequent transit network, but in both equity priority communities and non-equity priority communities, not at the cost of continued cuts in the coverage. So some more details on the proposal and the changes. I'll sort of skip through these slides that are network-wide unless there are questions on this. I'll go very quickly through this and then focus on the ones within or around Albany. But 72, as I mentioned, had some changes. 18 is included in the net service reductions lines as the two main impacts for us. The other change really on they have a call out on Transbay, consolidating the L and LA. So having the L continue to run on Pierce, but serve some of what was served by LA further north in Contra Costa County. So new route segments doesn't really affect City of Albany, nor the discontinued route segments. So I'll run through their overall impact slides here and then dive into specific changes.
Can we go back one?
Sure.
I actually disagree. The way the lines are drawn, this does affect Albany. I'm not sure which route that is.
That's the 72. The 7.
That is not the 72.
You're talking about the long red line is, I believe, the LA that's discontinued,
Okay.
and a piece that's added doesn't show it there, but
It's two slides back.
it's the freeway of the LA that's no longer running there.
Great.
Is that
Thank you.
piece. Yeah. I will note also of importance for Albany is because they're comparing to existing service, the 80 doesn't show up as discontinued here. The 80 was included in the unconstrained scenario, but was in neither of the two scenarios and continues to not be in this draft final plan. So the impacts with this plan, again, keeping existing resources and coverage, but adding runtime and layover time means you're dropping frequency in places. So you see some negative numbers here in terms of loss in population with access to 15-minute service, change in jobs with access to 15-minute service, and zero vehicle households with access to 15-minute service. So this, while on the one hand, not surprising if you're adding more resources to do what's current schedule, but got big reaction because this wasn't part of the earlier scenarios, so it came a little late in the process to be proposing this kind of change here. So they show how this impacts equity priority communities versus not. It did show increases in shifting a little bit away from peak specific, had some midday access benefits, and relatively small in terms of overall service numbers, access to grocery and hospital. And so some of those drops in frequent, it really shows up in this chart, in that 11 to 15-minute service goes from 8 routes with that frequency to 5 in these changes. So there was a discussion, a lot of this, which doesn't really show up in the plan and schedules, is BC Transit's ongoing efforts to recruit and retain enough operators to provide reliable service. So a piece of this is providing better working conditions, having reliability so that the operators can get the breaks they're supposed to at the end of the line and start the next line on time, comes into this effort to really build in what it would take to get higher reliability in the service. So I'll run through this since this is changing a bit. Don't know what the next steps exactly will be in their planning process. The board action was to push it out 6 months and to engage with the operators and see if there would be my understanding, my knowledge isn't very deep on this, but they were targeting August when they can make changes per agreements with their operators, and don't want to have to wait till next August, and so we'll try to have an opportunity to do that next spring versus having to wait a whole year before they can make some of these changes. All right, so I took slides that were presented to council with the scenarios and have amended them with information in this plan to talk through the changes in this plan for Albany. So line 7, the design, this sort of circles Albany, continues the change that was in the alternatives in terms of where it goes in Emeryville, going to the Amtrak station rather than to the marina area. And the proposal does drop the frequency for the 7 from 30 minutes to 60 minutes. For line 12, the alternative scenarios had some changes at the end of the line to go out to the Berkeley Marina. Those are no longer in, so I've sort of slashed it out. I don't have new maps from them, but the draft final plan maintains the current route and increases headway from 20 minutes to 30 minutes. And the weekend remains at 30 minutes. For 18, there are route changes on the other end of 18, going from downtown Oakland out to Montclair, and the frequency changes from 16 to 20-minute weekdays. weekday and remains 20 minutes on the weekend. The 52 in the alternative scenarios, they were considering a change in route along Cedar that is no longer in the plan. It's proposed to go on the existing route and maintain the existing frequency. So 72 does have changes. The alternatives scenarios had the 72 going away and having the 72 and 72M have some stop reductions. This draft final plan brought back the 72R, but only at 30-minute frequency, and has the 72 and 72M also 30-minute frequency. I have a chart later that goes through the details on that. The line 27 is got changes at the other end and switches to line 36 to cover the stretch from UC campus to Rockridge instead of it being part of 27. And the frequencies here remain. And then, as I mentioned, the LA Transbay route is proposed to be discontinued, and the L changes to pick up the Richmond Parkway Transit Center within its route. And the G remains. There was consideration of having it go join the freeway at Buchanan and not go down San Pablo Avenue. They're back to the current existing route for the G.
Was a really interesting little wiggle on Buchanan. They were going to take that turn back instead of the stoplight?
I think they have some old network of pre-reconfiguration so this is a summary of the frequency changes sort of all across those. There is impacts for Albany and Albany adjacent, but it is within this context of a number of different lines having frequency changes in this effort to build in time for the reliability numbers to go up. And here's the chart. So for the 72 existing, I have 72 and 72M currently 2 an hour with the rapid, 5 an hour. The earlier scenarios dropped the rapid and increased the 72 and 72M to 4 times an hour. This final one sort of has them each running 30-minute headways. But looking at sort of the total number of buses running, if you're agnostic on whether it's rapid or not, it's continuing to reduce the number of buses running on the San Pablo corridor under this latest plan. So as I mentioned, the hearing last night, there was a move to extend the planning process by 6 months. There was direction to also look to further reducing the impacts to equity priority communities and try to not have this change in the plan timeline mean it's a whole nother year before changes are made. And we can really anticipate continued work to find where this acceptable balance is going to be between increasing reliability, desire for frequent service, and the equity and service coverage, the three vision elements in the planning effort. I was going to note, I think I mentioned line 80 hasn't been in these alternatives other than the unconstrained vision. Council and city comments following the council discussion did ask AC Transit to consider extending 18 or 52 up Pearson to El Cerrito Plaza if the restoration of 80
Can you
wasn't.
just explain what line 80 is?
Line 80
Or was?
was the service from, I don't know, others may know better where it continued once it went into Berkeley, but El Cerrito Plaza down Pierce Street, so it was a connection for Pierce Street to connect to the BART station and Plaza, and continued south. I don't know actually the full route. I could pull up their unconstrained vision and pull it up in a minute during discussion maybe.
Okay, that's enough for now, thanks.
The only other thing I was going to mention is that, just so that we have a heads up, is Transbay service did come up several times in the AC Transit Board discussion as outside that core service and not necessarily equity target and sort of transit dependent folks often having, especially where there's duplicative coverage with BART access to getting into San Francisco. So as staff goes back per the new direction, there may be additional changes proposed to Transbay service based on that conversation. With that, I'll open it up to questions.
Anybody like to start off with questions? Ed?
Justin, can you confirm that this doesn't, the changes in headways in Albany don't change the effects of the laws that are currently based on headways and intersections of lines?
Yeah, we've had a bit of a discussion on that. As far as we can tell so far, it isn't high enough change in the headway and the frequency that would trigger changes in where multiple lines of sufficient frequency intersect for land use law.
The threshold in most of the state legislatures' actions are 20 minutes. And so the combination of the 72s is still under 20, and the 18, I think, went from 16 minutes to 20. So they're still in that. What was a major transit stop is still a major transit stop.
Great. Do you know if these schedules have been planned out enough that we know if they're adhering to the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit in their schedule on Solano?
I don't. When we did the speed limit change, they didn't see that as impacting their service time, so I wouldn't anticipate that that's the case.
Was there any discussion on this state designation of a, I'm sorry, Jeff just used a term, but I'm blanking on it, major bus route? Is AC Transit aware that if they go above that every 20-minute headway limit, it starts changing zoning regulations under many of the new housing bills that have come out in the last 5 years? I mean, is it an issue on their radar at all?
I would presume so. It hasn't been part of our specific conversations with them because we haven't seen it really impacting us yet. But
Okay.
Any questions from this side of the room? So I would like to just solidify my understanding of a couple of the lines that you mentioned. Regarding the 72, it seemed like in some of the drafts they were eliminating the 72R, which would mean that all of the 72s would make the same stops, and they would all kind of travel at the same general speed in their section on San Pablo Ave. Is that correct? But then in this draft, they've reintroduced the 72R.
That's correct.
We're back to having like some of the buses move along San Pablo Ave at a generally faster pace than others.
Yeah, currently the R is more frequent and the 72 and 72M are less so. So this latest round doesn't have a frequent rapid. It has sort of the same number of rapid as 72 and 72M, but because if you were going to do the rapid, you could take the local, you do get multiple buses. It just means a longer travel time.
But when we talk about having 6 buses per hour, that does not necessarily mean that there's a bus scheduled to arrive every 10 minutes, because they're not all running on the same, at the same pace.
Right, I would
System.
presume that the 72 and 72M could be spaced evenly. The rapid should be able to proceed faster than the others.
It'll just come when it comes. So can you remind me the numbers per hour of each of those?
In the draft final, it's 2 per hour for
Two,
each of
two, two.
those.
So would they plan to schedule this 72 and 72M so that together one of those would show up every 15 minutes, and then the 72R is just luck of the draw?
Presumably, they're not at the point where they're, developing schedules for it, but that
Okay.
would be the intent.
I just emailed you a link to an article that has a diagram of the 80.
The 80 looks like served Ashby and Berkeley, and so I think there were some other changes to pick up that service through the network, so that part is getting covered elsewhere rather than restoration of the 80.
Okay, that was my next set of questions, was about, did you say the 80 was one that served Pierce Street? And no?
So just to briefly describe it, if I may, it started at the Plaza BART station, went down Fairmount, or is that Central? Central to Pierce Street, and then came into Albany, went up Buchanan to Jackson, through the village, and then south to Ashby from there on 6th.
So it was a west of San Pablo Ave route? going
Yeah, that connected directly to BART.
South, closer to the bay?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a route that is running today, but is,
No, it hasn't run since COVID.
oh, okay. And it's not being brought back? Okay. So does that mean that in the draft final plan, are there any buses that travel past the Pierce Street towers in Albany?
Solely the Transbay bus.
Transbay, okay.
And you cannot locally ride a Transbay bus at either end of the line.
Can I add a question? Somehow I remember something related. We cannot add speed bump on a route that has a bus on it. So, because when the gentleman at the beginning of the meeting mentioned the survey, we didn't do Pierce because Pierce actually had a large amount of speeding. Just looking at the data, if I remember right. And at that time, I remember the discussion is that there's no point of continuing that discussion because if we can't put a speed bump on it because of the buses. Now there's no bus running on it, or buses that are serving our neighborhood. We put some bumps over there just for the sake of those residents over there.
So
It seems like, okay, I guess this is still a question. If you have an answer, go ahead.
I do, because we have multiple speed tables on Pierce Street, and the G Transbay bus does still run down Pierce. So there may be other constraints on what more we can do for traffic calming, but we already have speed tables. I drive over them periodically.
Yeah, so at least I can remember the one that's close to the newly built park.
There, as well as a couple of them in front of the high-rise condos.
Maybe I remember around, or maybe the discussion was talking about adding one more.
Yeah, whether cumulative, that I don't know.
Thank you.
If I recall correctly, the area we were interested in had slope to it on Pierce, and there are all sorts of challenges with installing speed humps on slope.
Okay, any other questions about the staff presentation? Well, let's move on to public comment if we have anybody online.
If you'd like to address the commission on this item, please use the raise your hand function. And I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Okay. I guess we can start discussion, but will you keep your eye on the Zoom so people can still raise their hand as we begin our discussion if they do have public comment? Well, who would like to go first? Michael?
Actually, I have another question.
Okay.
I did attend a dog and pony show with AC Transit years ago, and there was a discussion then of, having, in BART starting to do this now, real-time information available on your cell phone of when the next bus is going to be there. And I guess the technology is available to do this for buses. Was there any discussion of this in this whole program?
Not in this component of it. They
Okay.
probably work on that technology outside of the service planning, but it hasn't.
But that's available today for AC Transit. I can pull up a map showing where all the buses are and see them driving along the map.
It does. All right. I'm sorry to ask the question. I'm really not familiar with it.
It's on, I took an AC Transit bus this afternoon. It's on Google also. You can just use Google Maps and it'll give you real-time ETAs.
Yeah, my experience was that the official AC Transit app offered some of that information, but there was a separate app that you could download that was not part of the official AC Transit offering. It was by a third party that gave an even better interface that the map I just described with the little caterpillars creeping along it. Great. All right, so moving into commission discussion. Who would like to go first?
Well, I would like to thank staff for encapsulating that presentation. And I'm disappointed that the current plans don't seem to address the highest density in Albany. I have spoken at several opportunities, and I would encourage others to do so as well.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we're not in a position to take action as a commission here, other than to do what you just said, to call out what we see as the gaps in this and encourage people to comment to AC Transit directly. Is that the limit of our authority here?
Do we have a population density heat map of Albany?
I'm sorry, I missed that. Well,
Hey, I've just never actually seen a population density heat map of Albany. I just kind of assumed that it was fairly regular, except around the areas where there were more apartment complexes. But
Well, I think there's just one place that is an outlier for the whole city of Albany, which is
And
the
there's
Pierce
the-
Street Towers.
okay,
But other than that, I don't know.
yeah, I guess University Village is
Right, so I think that's going to change with the university high-rise as that comes online. It'd be interesting to see how much.
From a zoning point of view, those blocks north of Brighton Avenue are zoned as R3, so they are relatively, besides those towers on the Albany Hall area, that is the highest density.
Okay.
That's where all the apartments are.
So I had a general observation about the balancing act that they did here. It seems like, as usual with 3 goals, you can meet any 2 of them, but not all 3, which is reliability, frequency, and coverage. And there were a lot of comments from the public and comments in the presentation about people preferring one of those over another. But kind of the gut feeling I get from this plan they put out is that they essentially have opted to maintain reliability and reduce frequency. I don't know if that's an accurate overall description of what they've done, but that's kind of the big picture that I got from this, is that we're looking at a coverage map that's fairly similar to what we had, and we're trying to maintain reliability or improve reliability by reducing frequency. And that may be a good choice, but the comments that they highlighted didn't seem to clearly say that people valued reliability higher than frequency. I don't know, maybe I misread it, but my sense was that there may have been a comment about preferring reliability over more coverage, but in the balance between reliability and frequency, it feels to me like they've gone pretty far in the direction of reducing frequencies in the name of preserving reliability. And I don't know, maybe that's what people were asking for in the meetings, but I just didn't get a strong read on that being the public's preference overall. So I wondered if anybody else had any observations about that.
I know BART recently made similar changes to reduce reducing the number of trains in circulation and reducing their frequency slightly. And their hope was to actually make the trains more populated. And it may, the real-time data that Commissioner Barnes is talking about is pretty readily available. And I think maybe frequency of service becomes less of an issue, when you can plan down to the minute, an hour in advance. And then, they're just trying to make, I don't know if they're expecting throughput to change at all. But I don't know, I'm just speculating here.
So is the challenge in preserving frequency about their budget or about the availability of, is it that they don't have enough money to hire new operators, or they can't find people to hire?
Well, your first question was, is it money or operator availability? And I don't think it's about money to hire operators. I think it's about money in general and availability of operators. I wish they'd chose 4 metrics, and then they could do 3. Maybe next time they'll try that. We should keep that in mind here, too. To me, they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. There's some fiscal issues. There are equipment maintenance issues, and then problems hiring operators. It almost seems like it's time for them to start building dormitories or something. It's a tough situation. I don't think they have the land for that, though.
Do we know what the timeline on all of these coronavirus relief funding packages are that seem to make up a third of their operating budget. Like maybe they're trying to plan into the future because those sunset soon. Because that's a lot. Like just looking at their budget summary, it's over 165 million or 170 million of their 545 million total budget. It's a big chunk. I don't know. It all seems a little out of scope. Like we're not going to come up with $100 million to noticeably change their coverage area. Put another $1 on the gasoline tax.
Well, there is movement afoot to institute a Bay Area-wide transit revenue measure of some sort, so.
Oh, okay. That's very encouraging.
It's not a slam dunk, but people are trying. So the other area that I just wanted to bring up for discussion was this whole thing with the 72s and the meaning of bus rapid transit in the context of the 72 and how that ties in with the county plans to improve San Pablo Ave and dedicated bus lanes in the down at Oakland and South Berkeley areas. And like, do folks feel that AC Transit is aligned in its planning with what the county is planning to do to the street and the hope of turning it into a major transit corridor? And I don't have an answer here or a particular criticism.
I think that's a good question because in theory, the dedicated bus lanes are going to help reliability. They're going to help travel time. So that's good. It will benefit all the lines, not just the rapids, but the local buses as well. So I kind of like the idea that they're keeping at least 2 rapids. Because for the people who are traveling, more end to end, it will save them time with fewer stops. Getting a bus every 15 minutes at all the stops is not terrible headway compared to what we're seeing. I mean, I'd love to have it be, sub 10 minutes so that you just don't bother checking the schedule. You go and you figure in a few minutes you're likely to catch a bus at any of the stops. But our rapid stops aren't even that far apart. So given that they're really constrained, and I feel like this is all sort of what's the least disfavored cut that they can make rather than what's the most popular gain that we can get, the balance does seem to be, at least in the chart that they gave us, the most supported or least despised, if you want to think of it that way. But it's constrained. I think there's no way around that. So trying to balance really does seem like what they have achieved, even if there's pieces of it that we aren't thrilled with. But raising the question of the San Pablo Corridor project, you kind of have to maintain some of the 72 and 72R there to be able to demonstrate how the corridor improvements are going to do for the buses.
You don't want to have a bunch of empty dedicated bus lanes after the project is built.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully the corridor improvements will improve transit enough on San Pablo to offset any of the reductions that we're getting in practice. I mean, the numbers, on the table all look great, but are we achieving them? And if the answer right now is not so much, but after the transit improvement projects, it's like, yeah, we're actually doing better. Maybe we don't see a net loss.
And also, I think the building a stronger corridor like the 72, 72M makes much more sense, given in the last few years we changed a lot of zoning laws. So hopefully, we can see more density along San Pablo, and then that will make sense. Right now, doesn't make sense for Albany, said a lot of density goes to the west, and then you lines on the east. So that's the mismatch we have. But in general, looking at the regional level, I think this makes sense. I personally, I would prefer more resources goes to the critical corridor, because that makes sense, because you always look at transit and land use the same, not just for the transit, not trying to cover everyone. That's just the reality.
Yeah, especially as we're planning to direct more and more of our housing construction onto that corridor.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that it continues to be a good transit corridor like we advertised it to the developers.
Maybe in 5 years, with the Albany Bowl project getting up, maybe that will make sense now at that time.
So when Transit came and presented to us, I think the 72 lines were talked about, and I remember them saying that they weren't seeing a great deal of difference in the operating times on the ground between the rapid and the non-rapid. And so I'm a little surprised to see 3 different 72 lines. I understand that the 2 M's have different lengths and the R is different, but so I was a little surprised about that.
So in one of the earlier drafts, they had eliminated the 72R.
It was a potential proposal.
Yeah. And it sounds like you're saying that, given that aligns with the observation that the R doesn't really go much faster than the regular buses, so why have 3 instead of 2?
I've found it a little confusing as an occasional bus user on San Pablo. Which stop am I going to stand at? Where's the next one? Where should I go to? And how long should I wait there before going to the next one?
Yeah, like if I see a 72 coming, but there might be a 72R coming in 5 minutes, should I wait and make up the time? It is confusing.
Well,
as
it
an
depends on
occasion,
what stop you're at, because that 72R might not stop at your stop.
or how far you're going. If you
Yep, that too, yeah. So the other thing, I did some investigation around possibly pulling bus service down to the target area. And I had some conversations with people who worked there. And when the 80 was in operation, they found that the distance between the Pearson Buchanan stop, or the nearest stop to Pearson Buchanan, to the Target store was quite cumbersome. And now we're talking about service all the way up at San Pablo Avenue. That seems like kind of a non-starter for somebody who's...
and you say the distance was, you mean for somebody who had to walk that distance because the bus didn't go there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah. To get from the store to the bus, or the bus to the store.
Yeah, it really seems like the buses are giving up on serving Target at this point.
It's really
Well,
hard.
they never did.
Yeah.
Sorry?
It's just really hard to get to unless you're in a car.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Tried to pick up something there on my bike the other day, and it was profoundly unpleasant.
It is, and the roads are in bad shape, and yeah.
I made
Makes it
the
worse.
terrible mistake of leaving towards Berkeley because I was going somewhere in Gilman, and
Oh,
I will
yeah.
never do that again.
Yeah.
Not until the roundabouts are in, yeah.
Well, any other observations or concerns about this, all of this? Okay, well, thank you for distilling that huge number of details into what was relevant to us. I think that was a lot of careful work by staff, and I really appreciate it.
Chair Chomsky, do you want me to see if there's anyone in the public who'd want to address this one?
Oh, yeah, have any hands gone up in the meeting?
If anyone would like to address the commission on this, on the question of AC transit service, please use the raise your hand function. Seeing any.
All right, I think we can move on to item 5-2, the new state law regarding red curbs at intersections.
Thank you, Chair. So really the intent here is to provide an overview of the change in the vehicle code and how that relates with our city policy and our implementation of that. So the legislation and our policy really are about intersection daylighting as a safety measure to increase visibility, primarily of pedestrians crossing the roadway. The city policy is to restrict vehicle parking 15 to 20 feet on the approach, 20 feet, and ability to reduce down to 15 if that would provide an additional vehicle parking space. And on the departure side of the intersection, 10 feet with the ability to go down to 3 feet if that would provide an additional vehicle parking space. And if the remaining space to a driveway or a curb cut doesn't provide sufficient space for a vehicle parking, that we would red curb it for clarity there. So AB 413, that went into effect at the beginning of the year. State places a state restriction on vehicle parking, stopping, and standing adjacent to roadway crossings across the state. And per Assemblymember Lee's proposal, most states other than California have had a similar statewide prohibition like this, and California till now has been a bit of an outlier on this. Only warnings can be issued this year. It's in effect, but warning only, and citations can be issued after January 1, 2025. If it's marked with paint or a sign, the city can currently and continue to issue citations for that. So more specifically, AB 413 prohibits parking within 20 feet of the vehicle approach side of any unmarked or marked crosswalk, or 15 feet where a curb extension is present. So some reduction reflecting the visibility improvements of curb extensions there. So marked or unmarked crosswalk. This applies to all intersection crossings that connect sidewalks across the roadway, even if no crosswalk is marked. What we often call a crosswalk is the markings of a crosswalk, but the term applies whether it's marked or not anywhere that essentially the sidewalk brings you to an intersection and you have a crossing there. AB 413 does allow for a local authority to establish a different distance, but it must, one, establish by ordinance that includes a finding that the different distance is justified by established traffic safety standards, and two, mark the different distance at the intersection using paint or a sign. During our revision to the intersection red curb policy in 2023, we reviewed outside guidance and found that generally falls 20 to 25 feet range. So doing our 15 feet justified by established traffic safety standards isn't something we've identified to date as something we would justify by ordinance. That would require doing some additional research and seeing if is other guidance that would support that. So what we're currently planning to do is continue the city's approach to incorporate red curb markings at intersections as we've established previously with the update to the policy last year, with the minor change that we'll just go ahead and be installing 20 feet on the approach side in line with the new law, rather than the 20 feet that can drop down to 15 to preserve a parking space. So that is our plan to incorporate the new law into our implementation of intersection red curb, and happy to take any questions.
Michael?
Yeah, the obvious question for me is, given our former policy, have we done a lot of 15-foot red curbs that we're going to have to go back and add 5 feet to?
This spring was going to be the first installation that we would do more as part of our striping refresh more comprehensively, so we haven't done a huge quantity of them. I haven't reviewed yet what we've installed and what would need to be adjusted to be in line with this. But I wouldn't anticipate it being a large number.
To follow up on that, in places where we already have a 15-foot red paint marking, the intention would be for Public Works to eventually extend that to 20 feet.
That would provide clear direction to
And
a
how-
resident. Currently, if we've installed something but doesn't have the ordinance supporting that, the 20 feet restriction is still in effect. So theoretically, you could still be cited if we
So-
painted only 15 feet and there's 5 feet that
Yeah,
the state is saying you can't utilize.
yeah. So if that is some extra work for the city Public Works Department, how is that prioritized in relation to the goal of continuing to paint red curbs in more intersections that haven't been treated at all? Like, is going back to retrofit these 15-foot paintings higher or lower priority than continuing to red curb more intersections throughout the city?
It would be handled more as a maintenance refresh, I think, rather than the forward-looking implementation is going to be, we have a contractor that's refreshing all of the roadway striping and zone by zone around the city. That will proceed. Looking at where we have conflicts with the new law can be done with just maintenance staff requests to touch up existing, or as it's folded into those zones, it'll be refreshed at the revised amount.
Okay, but Albany's own Public Works staff would likely take some time when they have a chance to extend some of those existing 15-foot marks to 20, but not on a particular schedule, just when it's workable.
Yeah, it will be nice to bring it into line with the new regulations, but I don't see an opportunity for it to really cause a lot of conflict.
And it's not going to be a whole work item that has to be prioritized and listed in a plan somewhere. It's just bit by bit as the opportunity arises. Okay. Go ahead.
There was a fair amount of concern in the email comments about people getting dinged for parking too close to the curb without it being painted. Are we expecting to be done doing all the red marking before the actual penalties come into phase in 2025?
I wouldn't anticipate us doing our refresh citywide within the next year. No, we're going zone by zone. So yes, there will be a period of time where the state regulations are citable, but we have not yet red painted across the city.
Thank you.
There's a statement, it costs like, let me see what it says. State reimbursement. I know maybe this cost is not much, but is the state going to pay our city to do that? No.
No. Theoretically, any new state regulation that has a cost on cities should come with funding and can be challenged, but that is not likely to come with money.
Other questions?
Yeah, just a brief question. Have you checked in with APD about this change?
Yeah, we've talked about it with police department, and while the new law is citable without red paint, their preference is for us to continue with the intersection red curb.
I can just see there being a lot of frustration by people being cited. If they're used to parking 15 feet away, now they have to park 20 feet away, but we haven't red curved it. I think APD doesn't have a lot of incentive to cite people in those situations. They have better things to do with their time. So, at least I hope they feel that way.
But also, for the calendar year 2024, it wouldn't be a citation anyway. It would just be a warning, right?
This year just would be a warning.
And it's also not fully depend on the APD. Residents sometimes, concerned residents sometimes just call the non-emergency line and call the police to come.
Yeah, actually, I've done that in the past. Thousand Oaks and Curtis is a fairly dangerous intersection. Every couple of months there's an accident there, usually just fender benders. But so, I'm in favor of the 20-foot rule. I think it would help for my local intersection.
Let's save our discussion till a little bit later. Do we have more questions? No, I have one more question, which is a couple actually. You mentioned that there's a different rule where there are curb extensions. Can you refresh my memory if there are places in Albany where we have curb extensions or are planning to install curb extensions?
We have curb extensions in several blocks of Marin, between San Pablo and Masonic, and at the Greenway, crossing of Marin. Solano has a number of blocks with curb extensions.
Can you
Bulb
bring up,
outs is another term for them.
can you bring up the slide that shows a picture of curb extensions? So when it says 15 feet, that's 15 linear feet. Is that 15 linear feet from the edge of the crosswalk?
Yes.
So the curb extension already covers some of that 15 feet, and the red paint would be quite a bit less than 15 feet.
Generally, I mean, this, new distance might be different from what we've done with curb extensions, but the intent would be you build the curb extension until you want to have a viable parking space adjacent to it.
And so is that approximately the way the existing curb extensions are built, so that they already occupy that 15 feet of space?
So, yeah, the new ones on Marin, they extend, and well, there's the painted bulb out version, and then there's also the curb line comes in when you have a parking stall. You keep it extended until you're creating a parking stall.
And those are about 15 feet,
I'd have to measure to see whether they're
but at least in the
line with
ballpark.
Just for clarification, if you did have a bulb out 15 feet wide, under the state law, there would be no red paint required.
correct.
And my final question is about mid-block crosswalks. Are they subject to the same rules as crosswalks at street intersections?
Yes.
Okay. And so the rule about I guess the example I'm interested in has an actual painted crosswalk, so it's clear that it is a crosswalk even though it's mid-block. Okay. That's it for my questions. Michael?
Yeah, further question. On the exiting, we allow 3 to 10 feet, correct? But the staff report says you can adjust that. I have the language up here. Hang on.
The staff
Yeah,
report
it says
said-
this is the final paragraph of the staff report. To align intersection red curb implementation with the change to state law, staff will begin installing 20 feet of red curb on the approach side and keeping the 3 to 10 feet range on the departure side. And then parenthetically, and increase the length if the remaining curb space is not sufficient for a vehicle to park. I was just unclear on that last bit and what that means.
Yeah, so if installing 10 feet of red paint leaves some space to the next driveway, but not enough space for a vehicle parking spot, and might encourage someone to park encroaching in a driveway, if we can't get enough to make a vehicle spot going down to 3, then we would just paint to the driveway.
Oh, wait. So,
Michael, can you make sure to stay close to the mic?
and the standard length of a parallel parking space is 22 feet? Is that right?
If it's a painted, if it's like a marked space, yeah.
Yeah. Because I was curious about, well, for example, right out here in our parking lot, I'm always a little annoyed because, you know, you come through the parking lot and it's full, and then you think, oh, there's a space up there on the right, and it's a motorcycle space. So do we make any allowances for different types of vehicles that would be longer or shorter?
We've grappled with this with our driveway red curb distances and what we allow. For this, we would err on the side of if it's potentially viable for a vehicle space, if it's not going to cause driveway conflicts, we would not red curb it. But if it created conflicts, we would revisit it.
For a vehicle being a regular car?
And just to clarify, this conversation is only about the existing city policy. It's not affected by the state law, right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, any other questions from the commission? Let's move on to public comment. I know we had several public comments by email. Do we have people online who would like to make spoken public comments?
Anyone would like to address the commission on the red curb policy, please use your raises a hand function in Zoom, please.
I'm going to give it a minute because I think some people will.
There are only a couple of people that might be out there. I'm not seeing any hands raised.
No hands raised. Okay. Well, if I could just summarize the public comments that I read in the email, it seems like they were fairly unanimous that they support the implementation of the new state law, and they much prefer to have the red paint in place before any citations start being issued. Is that a reasonable interpretation of what people said?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay.
I have to say, in my experience, it's usually when we actually talk about a specific project that we get people questioning this idea when it's in front of their house.
Everybody wants it to be done in other parts of the city.
Literally, yes.
Discussion.
So just kind of summarizing my understanding, the red curb is not ever needed theoretically, so there's no cost being imposed on cities, so there's basically zero chance of any kind of reimbursement from the state, because if we add it, they'll say, that was your choice. You didn't have to do it, we didn't require it. So I think Justin is 100% correct on that one. This is very well crafted to avoid the state picking up that cost. I do think the red curb is helpful. It's only needed for clarifying, or if we're going to, for the reasons that we have not yet identified, going to less than 20 feet. I do agree with the idea that if we, the remainder space is not enough to park a normal size car, we really kind of have to red curb it. That's what our prior discussions have led us to. At some point in future, we might decide to stripe some motorcycle spaces or on-street bike rack spaces or something, but I view that as a separate step. All this red curbing is going to be a huge lift. There's a good chance it won't be done before, beginning of 2025, and people are just going to have to adapt to it. I don't think that the police department's going to run out and cite every single car, but I do think that getting calls from concerned neighbors, et cetera, may be where it really starts. There's many fire hydrants that don't have the full 15 feet marked, or in some cases don't have any markings. We kind of expect people to know. It's going to take a while for people to get used to this, so there may be a little bit of pain come next January. But I appreciate that staff's working on trying to provide what clarity we can in the time that we have available. But again, bottom line, for pedestrian safety, the daylighting is something we've been pushing for. I'm happy to see it doesn't impact our departure side markings, so really no change there. The approach side is only slightly more aggressive than what we've got. So to some extent, on the marked spaces, not much difference. The fact that now unmarked spaces could be enforced a year from now, that's the big change. So it does push ahead our traffic safety goals, which I think is a good thing, even if it feels like this is a little bit awkward.
So I know that we as the commission can't really ask the police department to approach their enforcement in one way or another. Can we make some educated guesses about, I mean, I think we are making some educated guesses about how we think the police department may handle this, but is it correct to say that we think they're likely to cite or warn vehicles in the unmarked, newly forbidden spaces only if a person calls and requests it?
If I may, I think that based on certainly my prior conversations, the police department is likely to view this as another tool in the toolbox. So this is not a mandate that they have to go out and run around doing this enforcement, but where it poses a problem, it offers them the opportunity to do so. So
So if somebody is concerned about a vehicle that's parked in a place that they want to walk that they feel is unsafe, they're encouraged to call the police non-emergency number and report it, and perhaps an officer will write a warning this year or a citation next year.
Yeah, and I think that that's exactly right. And I would add that perhaps staff can talk to the police department and ask for a list of where warnings have been issued as a basis for prioritizing locations that need red curb for clarity.
Well, that's a great idea. Is that information that they'll have in their records that we can get in 6 months or 12 months or whenever?
We can ask.
And the other piece, of course, the fear that parked 18 feet from the crosswalk there, I don't see our officers out there with a tape measure being a common sight.
But there are definitely some places where there's a large vehicle parked right against the edge of the crosswalk that's there every day. And I know people are frustrated with that. So now people have something they can do. Even before the city gets around to doing any red curbing, people can start calling and requesting the warning and maybe start changing some behavior. Go ahead.
Well, the interesting thing for me is how this will interact with the 72-hour rule, because you're not supposed to park your car for more than 72 hours, but a lot of people do it. But now, if you're parking your car for more than 72 hours, and you've seen that, and you can say, and it's also only 15 feet from the curb, it gives the police maybe a little more incentive to respond. That was the situation that we had. There was a big black van that would park within 15 feet of the curb and be left there for weeks. And finally, I figured out who the neighbor was and wrote them a polite letter, and I think they ended up selling it. But so we'll see. But I think the critical issue is for the police. They're like, well, by the time I get there, somebody's moved the vehicle. That's one thing. But if
you know from your time in the neighborhood that vehicle is always there.
Yeah. I think that will make a difference. So I think this will help with that problem.
I'd love to see the city communicating this new law and making clear that it specifically that it applies to all painted and implied crosswalks.
And mid-block crosswalks.
And what?
And mid-block crosswalks.
And mid-block, yeah. That qualifies as all crosswalk, yeah. So.
Is that something that could go in the city newsletter?
Yeah.
If it hasn't already, maybe I missed it. Any comments from this side of the room? Well, I guess that's it. You're not looking for any direction or motions for
Comments.
this? Okay. And no hands have been raised in the meantime. Okay, then we're ahead of schedule. Let's move on to item 5-3, opportunities for shuttle service.
Thank you, Chair. So this item comes from one of the objectives within the City Council strategic plan under Goal 3, promote streets that support safety and transportation mobility options. The objective is to explore opportunities for shuttle service to connect community to business areas. As we discussed earlier, there are potential changes to transit service, but this is the coverage today. Both commercial corridors are served by AC Transit buses. Currently 16-minute weekday frequency along Solano Avenue, faster frequency along San Pablo Avenue, including transfer opportunity to BART at El Cerrito Plaza. In the staff report, I then talked through a few case study examples to provide some context on other shuttle services and other area transportation approaches. One was Emery Go Round, which is a fare-free shuttle service. It's run on 2 different lines connecting to the MacArthur BART station. It operates 15-minute weekday service, 5:45 in the morning to 9 p.m. at night on one line, and 6 to 9:45 on the other. And budget associated with the Emeryville Transportation Management Association shows annual direct costs of $3.85 million, with an additional indirect cost of $1.2 million for the service, with funding from the Business Improvement District of $4.4 million towards that. West Berkeley shuttle service, actually provided by the Emery Go Round, is providing similar service, but solely focused on the weekday commute times and direction. And for this, they developed a single shuttle service operating Monday through Friday, 6 to 10:30 in the morning commute window, and 3 to 7:30 p.m. in the afternoon, and at an estimated budget of $340,000 for that service. San Leandro Links operates a shuttle connecting employment in West San Leandro and the downtown San Leandro BART station. It also runs 2 loops, provides service every 30 minutes, Monday through Friday, also a peak commute hour service, so only 5:45 to 10:30 in the morning and 3 to 7:20 in the evening. It's operated for 20 years and identifies both grants and city funding, along with business and property owner partnerships and a business improvement district that funds approximately half of the total links budget at a cost of $612,000 to $800,000 annually over the last 3 years. And then finally, a little different service to talk about, Marin Transit Connect, tried an on-demand service within a specified service area from 2018 to 2023. It was intended to both provide service for older adults and people with disabilities, along with providing first and last mile connections for the general public. Smart train riders. It initially started as a smaller service area in northern San Rafael. Later was expanded over the pilot period to change the service and the technology to try to increase ridership and decrease the technology and overhead costs. The larger service area was 2.5 miles from all the smart stations, and it shifted to utilizing Uber's platform. And the non-accessibility riders actually used Uber's app to secure rides. It operated also Monday through Friday, but the full 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. period. Eventually, they concluded that high operating subsidy costs on the order of $50,000 per month and large post-COVID subsidy per passenger costs in particular warranted retiring the program. So just summarizing a little bit the examples that were reviewed for Emeryville, Berkeley, and San Leandro, really was focused on employee commute demand and focused on the last mile connections from transit to work. And it relied on business improvement district or employer financial support to really fund the operation. For in transit, they tried providing a non-fixed route on-call service within a 2.5 mile radius of rail transit stops and to serve both accessibility needs and general travel needs. The issues that they really identified leading to them phasing that out was there were reliability issues which limited with the on-call, on-demand approach that limited its usefulness. The on-call service also meant trips were not efficiently grouped together, and there were lots of vehicle miles without passengers and resulted in high costs per rider. And so in terms of exploring opportunities for here in Albany, really posed 3 questions for discussion to hone on what would be viable approach to really investigate further. One is, where is the travel demand that's not covered by AC Transit that we would be seeking to serve? 2, are there efficient and convenient ways to serve that demand? If it's not the commute to work hours where you have the more defined destinations and the sort of the peak sort of rush of people going in a similar direction, what models would we be looking to serve a more community-based transit service, and to overcome that convenience and reliability gap that Marin Transit identified. And then 3, are there viable mechanisms to fund and operate that service that we should explore? And so with that, I'll open it up for discussion.
Questions from the commission?
I would love to see number 3 addressed, I guess. What are our funding options? So are we looking at bond measures, or are there available grants that the city could apply for?
I think that's an open question.
Okay, so
Yeah,
you're identifying further research.
Yeah, I have seen grants, pilot grants, to try to kick some of these things off, but a lot of the times, you know, they struggle after that initial grant to get up and running. How would you identify the ongoing operation funding if you're getting started with a grant? Where does that go from there?
Can we include the Bishop Ranch Autonomous Shuttle as your case study, see how that works? Because I can't find anything online to see where the money comes from.
Yeah, I tried to look up some information on that one. I'm not sure if it was phased out or is still operating. I'd have to do some more research to see where that one's at this point.
A couple of months ago, they were doing a demonstration in the El Cerrito Plaza. I think they're still there.
But that, just to that, I know that is a business park. It's, I think, also to some
Sure.
extent employer-funded model as well.
Yeah, sure. And then I know the alignment is not ideal, but at least, for the autonomous shuttles to run, it's better to be within a kind of confined environment or have dedicated lanes. So in Albany, we at least have the Ohlone Greenway. That might work. But yeah, it might be some places you want to take a look at.
Any more questions from this side of the room? Michael, I saw you had a question.
The school district used to, I believe it still does, run a shuttle for special ed kids. And if you wanted to maybe see what their costs are like, you could ask them about it. That's it for now.
I think that's a pretty specialized service, using vehicles that only can hold a very small number of
And wheelchair lifts.
passengers and wheelchair lifts, but they also require less licensing hurdle, or a lower licensing hurdle because of a lower number of passengers than a general shuttle probably would.
So
Interesting reference, but I'm not sure it tracks.
I'm not sure either. So are we thinking 15-passenger vans? What kind of vehicle are we thinking about?
Well, let's get to that a little later.
Yeah. Did staff have a chance to take a look at the Walnut Creek trolley? It's a service that I think is funded by the business district. It happens to include BART, but it's mostly dedicated to running people around the downtown area. So it seems to mostly be kind of a downtown resident / park once kind of a shuttle. But it's run as a free shuttle, and it's managed by the transit district out there, County Connection.
Yeah, it's kind of, it shares stops and signage with the regular transit service that people pay for for individual rides, but this particular line on that system is free.
And then they have a special trolley bus that is, or
Theater.
one or more. It's distinctive, yes.
More questions? I was curious about per passenger costs, because I think in the presentation you showed what the Marin service costs per passenger, and it was quite informative, to say the least. Do we know the per passenger costs of the other services, or have they made that information available?
It should be findable, but I focused on total costs and the amount of coverage in terms of time of service. I haven't looked at their ridership numbers.
Can you clarify what a business improvement district is and whether our local organizations like the Solano Avenue Association are examples of that, or is a business improvement district something else?
Business Improvement District is something else. It is, I'm less familiar with actually the California example, but it's essentially a tax on business property that gets pooled to serve the business district. So it can go towards transit or cleaning or event programming, things that help attract and support commercial activity within the district.
And does it have to be enacted by voters, or?
I think it has to be approved by the people who are going to pay it. So the property owners on Solano Avenue, the Berkeley portion of Solano Avenue, they do have a business improvement district. I don't think it raises a lot of money, but I think they use it for a few of their programs and perhaps some street cleaning or something like that.
But there's nothing like that in Albany?
We don't have one in Albany, no.
Okay.
Wouldn't there used to be landscaped and lighting districts in Albany, but my understanding is you can't do that anymore. There also were there was that same structure of, you could specify the fees by the people who benefited from the.
Right, it's all kind of the same concept. It goes by different names. It's whoever is paying it has to approve it. We do have a landscape and lighting district. All property owners pay into that in Albany, and that goes towards parks maintenance and that kind of stuff. You could craft a measure to do that, but the voters would have to approve it. Business improvement districts, I think, are strictly speaking approved by the property owners, whereas I think landscape and lighting goes to the ballot and is approved by the voters. But one way or the other, there is a formal approval process.
Okay, any other questions?
One last thing is for the Emery go-round, they seem to have a lot of money. Is that because of Pixar? Is that just because they're such an outsized, presence in Emeryville? I'm just wondering, do we feel like there's any, Albany's smaller than Emeryville, but also doesn't have any sort of campuses like that. And I'm wondering if that is why they, if that provides most of the ongoing services, or if it just comes from the general retail establishments in Emeryville.
I haven't looked in detail at their revenues but I think it's a combination of large employers and large-scale retail, both.
Oh yeah, I guess they also have that sort of biotech district and the box stores and everything.
I'm a little rusty on my memory's a little rusty on all this, but I think essentially the city made a strategic decision decades ago that rather than to impose fees and so forth on new development to build more roadways, they decided to impose a significant fee to create this bus service, essentially this bus service. And so, that was a strategic decision. They made a good one in hindsight, and that's why you tend to see more road congestion in Emeryville as you're trying to negotiate around there, because they didn't make the investments in roadway capacity, which again was a good decision, I think, in hindsight.
I used to work in that area in the late 80s and 90s, and the Emery go-rounds predated the Pixar development.
Oh, okay.
But there were a lot of other retail and large employer developments at that time.
Yeah, I mean, if you imagine Solano Ave being populated by a store the size of Target, and then another one like that, and then another one like that, and then that's what Emeryville feels like sometimes. Okay, I think we're ready for public comment. Do we have any hands?
We do have a hand raised. Estella, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Estrella. I was really excited to see this item on the agenda. I think shuttles, I've always really enjoyed shuttles, and I think it could really meet some of the local needs that we have. I'm in an awkward position where I'm kind of smack dab between the two BART stations, so I've always felt like everything's kind of too far to walk, and there's not really a good bus to get me to either direction. And yeah, I think a shuttle could really help improve quality of life locally, and get us to, especially like the El Cerrito Plaza without our cars, even for someone who might be making a choice between a car driving there or not. And yeah, I know some folks were mentioning like trolleys in other cities. I also enjoyed and got to be on the free trolleys in Miami recently. I know it's a much bigger city, but they have like 5 different trolleys that basically reach the places where the metro system doesn't. So I thought that was really great. So yeah, I realized there's funding challenges, but just wanted to throw my support in there while as this topic kind of gets going and growing. So thank you.
Thanks for your comment. Do we have any other hands?
I'm not seeing any other hands raised.
Okay, and we did receive a comment by email suggesting that a service like this could be especially useful for Pierce Street and for the new development being built, the affordable development being built along Pierce Street, in an area where, as we just observed, bus service is not very effective.
There was also a long discussion on the Strollers and Rollers mailing list about access to the bulb and how it's currently, like, there's no plan for AC Transit to ever provide access, so it might be nice to at least like provide weekend service if we were building a shuttle to access the bulb.
Okay.
Right, I don't, it might be easier to allow dogs on a local shuttle than a
No,
easy
no,
transit
we
bus.
should also remove all the dogs from the bulb.
Oh, boy, that's a bigger issue. There does seem to be a demand for parking down there and for people getting there with their dogs.
Yeah.
Can people ride their dogs?
We can have a dog-powered shuttle.
Dogs.
I'm not as slight as you. That wouldn't work for me.
Depends on the dog.
Yeah. Wheeled dog sleighs, maybe.
Yeah.
Or a team.
Boy, I have several questions. Because there is some overlap with existing services. I think there are ambulance-like services for seniors who are in wheelchairs and need transportation. I don't know much about them, but I see them. There's that. But I think if there was a shuttle, a lot of kids from the new affordable housing project and condos would like to take it to go to school, or they'd like to have something that runs later in the evening so they can hang out on Solano Ave if they get tired of hanging out at 99 Ranch. I'm curious how many, 99, a lot of people in the condos can walk to 99 Ranch, and there's a relatively high number of Asian families in the condos. But I wonder how many of those families would also be interested in getting up to Solano Ave for shopping or hanging around, different set of restaurants. So I could see, condos and affordable housing project up to Solano. But that would maybe even extend into late in the evenings. And then there's the issue of, do we want to shuttle people back and forth to BART? And then there's an issue of disability transportation. So this could get really complicated.
It's interesting that the comment was talking about a trolley. I believe, if I read it right, the Key Route Boulevard used to be space reserved for the
Oh, yes, reserved.
reserved.
But it was never built.
Yeah, no. So they'll purchase the area, was ready for a trolley. It didn't work out. It would be amazing to have it.
But that's a trolley, like an actual trolley.
Yeah.
The trolley we're talking about in Walnut Creek is just a bus that
It's
is
just
decorated to look like a trolley.
called the trolley.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like one of those faux cable cars that
Right.
tourists ride in San Francisco.
But providing access to the schools from the further corners of the city, so that people didn't have to drive their children to school, especially up in the hills, would be a good, maybe potentially co-funding opportunity with the school district. And it would be interesting to at least do some surveys to see if there would be some way to get people out of their cars, like if we we ran something, like a shuttle along Santa Fe and then down to the BART station, or just like so the people up in the hills who might not want to do a long walk home, like when you live kind of like on the upper slopes and by Solano, you probably drive more often than you might. And if there were a shuttle from over there to the BART, they might take the BART a little bit more often. There's been mention that a lot of the carbon emissions from the city are transit oriented, and I wonder what role a shuttle could play in ameliorating some of those, and if that would open up additional funding streams. Like someone was telling me, I think it's Measure DD funding that is available for transit, or not transit, but climate related things.
Because kids going to school it's a very certain, all the origin and destination.
Yeah, I mean, I live right between both schools. There's significant amounts of traffic on Brighton and Portland every morning.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
At every school.
Yeah, and I'm sure from the other direction as well, but I don't see it as often.
Can I,
Well, again, that's something we should check in with the school district. I just know, having friends in the condos, that some of the older kids would walk to Albany High, but it could be sketchy because there used to be kind of a homeless encampment down there, and parents didn't want their daughters walking through there. With elementary school kids, you'd think that most of them would go to Ocean View, wouldn't be crossing San Pablo. But sometimes people do. And I have a hard time believing that the school district wouldn't have thought about this at some point, getting kids from the condos and now the affordable housing project over to the middle school and high school. And given it's a relatively fixed schedule, that might be the simplest if we're going to do something.
well, it's interesting. We've identified a lot of different nexuses of interest that we expect, and I had a lot of those written down. Students going east-west, waterfront access, businesses on Solano, San Pablo Avenue, and East Shore, and BART. The goal, as stated from the City Council, is connect community to business areas. So BART might be stretching a little bit under that mandate, but we could certainly propose something. As I start to think about this, first of all, the school district is exempted from providing busing for non-challenged students because of the size of the district and the distance between schools and the housing. And they like that. That would be a big cost center for them. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't necessarily have some interest in contributing. I know there's been some interest in transit passes, but as we noted, our existing network of busing with AC Transit doesn't particularly lend itself to east-west travel and doesn't go particularly close to the middle or high school, which is kind of frustrating. The flip side of all that is that if you're identifying getting people to BART, getting people to school and back, the morning time is going to be high demand all at about the same time. So if you're looking for using one shuttle or two shuttles, they're likely to be oversubscribed with what we're describing, or could be. So that's a hurdle. I'm in favor of exploring this. I just want to be realistic about what it costs and what can be accomplished. We're not going to take on busing for the school district.
Yeah, no, I was just...
But at the same time, what kind of service are we talking about? Are we talking about something that collects people from around Albany and helps them get to the shopping districts of San Pablo Avenue, East Shore, possibly, and Solano, then that's probably a lot more doable with a smaller or individual bus fleet. So I just want to be realistic about it.
Yeah, I think following up on Ken's comment that we could have a lower occupancy kind of van that circulates more continuously to get, say, folks from the condos up to Solano Avenue. The only trouble is all the kids will want to cram on it in the mornings, even if there's not room. I mean, this is a tough one. It's
So what is our goal? And I go back to the city council statement. Explore opportunities for shuttle service to connect community to business areas.
Well, I would say the fundamental purpose would be getting people back and forth from the condos in the affordable housing project up to Solano and back.
So you're interested in serving just a very small slice of Albany?
Well, what's the population in the condos?
It's a lot of people.
A
but
small geographic slice.
area.
I'm sorry?
A lot of people, but a small geographic area.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's 2,000, 3,000, what's the condo population?
It's probably, 900 units right now, plus the upcoming Saha, maybe close to 1,000 units by the time the Saha project is completed. In that, so a couple thousand people, yeah.
Yeah, 2.5 per housing unit typically.
That's about 10% of our population, right?
But then they're further away. I don't know. I mean, it's pretty easy. It's pretty easy to walk to Solano from we're 1 square mile, but if you live on San Pablo, up to Caluso, it's pretty easy to get to Solano from anywhere in that part, the central part of town.
For able-bodied people
Right. And
of a certain age.
Can I
Yeah.
remind you of the microphone?
that brings up the next question. Is this going to be for able-bodied people, or are we going to have some, wheelchair accessible vans, whatever? Because once we start talking about people who are not totally able-bodied, it's pretty tricky to get in and out of a 15-passenger van, if you're on crutches, for example.
Right, and then we have to start eliminating more parking spaces for the stops, and they have to be on level ground. So, yeah, there are a lot of details involved in this. Certainly, if, heaven forbid, the racetrack property was developed as some large office park, which I'm not personally a supporter of, but there could be an opportunity to request that they provide this kind of shuttle to connect to the rest of Albany. I'm not saying that's a good strategy, because I wouldn't like to see it happen. But that kind of opportunity is something we should stay attuned to.
I guess I just keep coming back to that $126 or whatever that figure was, that like we can sit here all night talking about where we'd like to have a shuttle service, and where we might get the money from, but if we're really up against an environment where each ride is that expensive.
Well, that was an on-demand service, right, in Marin?
Yeah,
So that model doesn't exactly track necessarily, but yes.
yeah, that's why I guess I was hoping we could have similar numbers like that for the other services, so we could say, is this just completely beyond our means? And like, would we be throwing a lot of money at a solution that serves only a small number of people? And I wish we had a better way to know the answer to that, but it seems like we don't. I just worry about like letting our imaginations run wild on what would be useful to the city as a whole, when you think about the actual per person cost of providing it, is it still reasonable?
Is the majority of the cost coming from the driver, like hiring a person? That, I'm just asking.
That's all, I mean, I think AC Transit in their discussion talked about 70, in the 70% range, costs being operators of personnel. So it is a large cost often. I mean, there is, especially in starting up a service, capital cost to whether there's fixed stops or just the vehicles.
If it is 70%, I'm actually really positive about the future when the autonomous technology come in, and we can only we don't have the means to cover like 100%, but maybe Albany has the means to cover the 30%. Remain hopeful.
We may not be able to wait for that.
Yeah, it's kind of an indefinite timeline.
Kids can.
My kids can't afford to live here. They moved elsewhere. Sorry. No, I'm serious. Wait till your kids get a little older.
But, one simple way to approach this is to figure out where the fiscal constraint is. What can the city afford? And it may be so much lower than any conceivable bus plan we're just done. So that
That's
might be
kind of
another
what I'm
way to-
worried about, is that like spending a lot of time discussing where the bus should go is premature when we don't even know if we're in the ballpark financially.
Right, so that brings me to consider, okay, do we need to start from a fiscal standpoint first? Do we find the population that has the funding? I mean, that's kind of what they did in Emeryville. They developed their routes based on which companies were willing to pay to participate in the service. And they chose their routes to serve those businesses and connect to BART.
And remember, there were big biotech firms in Emeryville very early on, like Cetus, companies like that, Chiron. So they had a lot of money, which in Albany, other than Target, we don't really have any big businesses.
We do have large employers, but then, like the USDA, but would they participate in something like this? And would they see a value in it? And does it fulfill the mandate? Does that connect the community to business areas? Yeah, they could go to lunch on Solano, right? But is that enough of a...
Do we mean retail business area or?
I'm just reading what it says.
Right.
And perhaps we toss this back to City Council and ask for more guidance.
And a fiscal constraint.
I think that if we look at the wording of the council referral, it's look at the opportunities. And right now, the opportunities look like zero, quite bluntly, because Emeryville had lots of great biotech, had lots of commercial. They functionally were a redevelopment city to begin with. So, so much of their costs were borne on redevelopment funds that they were able to have the businesses put additional funds into something like the Emery Go-Round. West Berkeley, you've got Bayer and big property owners there who run similar businesses that wanted a shuttle and could not afford to do it without basically outsourcing that to the Emery Go-Round, because the infrastructure needs, on top of the driver costs, maintaining the buses, having somewhere to store them,
Having a spare bus.
spare buses, all that stuff, the incremental costs are tremendous. So taking Emery Go-Round and just stretching it north into West Berkeley was something that big businesses with a lot of money were able to just barely afford. So I don't see us having that same kind of opportunity here. The businesses we've talked about, I don't think Target needs to connect to the businesses. It would be great, but they've got a great big parking lot. So they have people driving there.
They've made their investment.
Yeah, so the,
They also have a shopping model where people buy more stuff on a trip to Target than they can carry on the bus. And often,
to some extent, I still think it would be amazing for them if there's a direct connection to UC Village that didn't involve going all the way around. It would be good for the community. So if we're looking at the need side of the equation rather than the opportunity side, yes, Target, the condos on Pier Street, the affordable housing on Pier Street, connect to El Cerrito Plaza BART because people need to get there. Up and down Solano, you're passing by all three elementary schools. You don't even really have to divert more than a block. So I think the opportunity is great there in terms of the need side of the equation. Another question is, would this be a fixed route? Because the things I've talked about so far would all be part of a route that either loops on Pierce, Solano, San Pablo, to El Cerrito BART, back down Central, something like that. Or are we talking about an on-demand route, which I think is cost prohibitive?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder what percentage of that Marin Transit thing was just fees they were paying to Uber for every single ride to run their dispatch infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in terms of volume, if we want to have a fair number of people traveling from the condos to shops and restaurants on Solano, I think a trolley style or bus style of vehicle makes a lot more sense than a van where you're having to climb over people getting in and out. I don't think we can manage that. I think a larger, more bus-type vehicle with a central aisle makes more sense. So again, the need side, I think there's lots of cool stuff. It would be great. And I'd love to see that. If our business district is hurting for parking, trying to make a deal with AC Transit to use their park and ride lot under the freeway as a stop to pick up passengers and deliver them to businesses in Albany, that all sounds great, but I think at the end of the day, until we've got a funding mechanism, we're not going to make this a reality. And that's maybe the question back to council is to say, are you proposing a business improvement district that's going to bring in $3 million a year? I mean, we're probably not going to be looking at the $5 million or so for Emery-Go-Round, but what is our number? What's our operating cost? I don't know that we can go much below half of what they are costing. Maybe we can.
I mean, is there any way to partner with them, like West Berkeley did? Like, it would certainly make a lot more sense to have them, bear those incremental costs, and we just,
Yeah.
the Albany go round, whatever.
Exactly. I mean, we already have a system in Alameda County where there's way too many transit services, and we're talking about consolidating. So let's not, create another one. You're absolutely right. I totally agree. Partner with an existing service to, provide some dedicated routes that we pay the incremental cost on is going to be by far more affordable. But we're definitely in the multi-millions of dollars, I suspect. And so can we afford it?
I wonder, one way to determine if there's a market for this is to determine if, people with minivans do this spontaneously. Do they carpool the kids to schools in the morning? Do they drop off their kids on Solano at night and let them run around for 2 hours and go back and pick them up? I tend to think that if there's a market there, then sometimes individuals have figured out a way to meet that demand without us being there. And if that's never happened, that would make me more skeptical that there really is a demand for it.
I heard families in the South Bay when they have this service. So someone who doesn't have a job or but have an event, they pick up kids and pick them up for a fixed fee. But that's built on like community and trust.
I'll say for my kids, they just walked. Albany's small enough that it was very rare that they would say, "Can you give me a ride to wherever?" unless the weather's really bad. So most of the time, I think,
And
in terms of the demand, and
do you live in the condos or?
I live on Solano, a block from Pierce Street. So going anywhere in Albany is walk over the hill.
Okay.
So condos are even worse, but not much farther.
Okay. Yeah, no, I just was wondering, yes, it's the perspective.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's an even bigger challenge for the people in the condos because they do have a farther distance to go. So the geographic challenges are somewhat similar.
And then there's the communication challenges. How do you meet up with other parents to network? And it's,
I think those types of carpooling efforts tended to link up to places outside of Albany. Within Albany, not quite as much.
so if we're tossing this, or we're handing this back to the city council, I would build on what Fareed said about asking about what kind of financial parameters they could give us an idea of. And also, would love to have the business associations here to talk about their needs and expectations and possibly what they might be willing to contribute or how they would expect to contribute, I should say.
And I mean, I suppose additionally, are they going to block losing some, like if we were to do a fixed route bus service, shuttle service, that's probably losing some parking spots on Solano. Are they going to complain?
How hard are they going to complain?
How hard are they going to complain?
Is there a possibility to piggyback on the AC transit stops, or?
Yeah.
There's a tradition of sharing those stops with things like Bear Transit and others, so it should be doable.
Clear as mud, right?
One thing we could do perhaps is as your agenda load accommodates, kind of assemble some of these thoughts together and bring it back to you for a little bit more refinement before posing the questions to City Council.
Is there more we can do with the information we already have, or?
If we want to kind of take the lead, it would still involve, reaching out to the businesses that might be paying into a business improvement district and saying, hey, you're the ones who are going to have to vote for this. Would you? And if so, how much? And get a rough sense of how much revenue could that generate? Does it get us even close to being worth pursuing the rest of the conversation?
So we could consider inviting the business districts the next time we consider this item?
Yeah. And then through their structure, maybe they can do some informal polling and bring that information back to us.
That might be more constructive for the city council, yes.
Yeah, that sounds better than asking the city council to invent a number for us, because they won't have any better idea than we do about how much we should be spending on this. Okay. Any further discussion on this? You feel like you have the direction you need for the next steps?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. All right, that closes item 5-3, and now it's time for me to give up my baton. Selection of chair and vice chair. Do you have any
So normally,
introduction to this, or?
the agenda has a sentence or two that's essentially an excerpt from the advisory body handbook and the process and procedures, encouraging that it be rotated on an annual basis, but if the commission decides the current chair and vice chair wish to continue to serve, I believe this is the end of your first year, so that's an option as well to continue the existing chair and vice chair. And typically it's a little bit easier if you start by selecting the chair, make a nomination, and if more than one person wishes to nominate somebody, if there are more than one nomination, you vote one at a time, but select the chair, and then with whomever is left, then select the vice chair.
So I'd just like to make the observation that all 7 of us are eligible to serve as chair or vice chair, even though we were appointed in different ways. We're all of equal standing on the commission. So do we have any nominations for chair?
So you're the current chair, and Commissioner Peng was the vice chair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, but last year I remember having the conversation that we were interested in asking if you wanted to be chair, and you said
Yeah, it's
maybe not
because
yet,
of
but
the
have you-
time constraint. So you have been doing a great job, and you have never missed a meeting. So I have been enjoying the title without doing much. And thank you so much for that. For now, I think
You put it on your resume, right?
I haven't done that yet. So my company actually have a background survey. That's actually a red flag saying, oh. But I passed that, so it's fine. But for me, I still have the time constraint, so I can't.
Okay, so that's unchanged. Your reluctance to be chair is still continuing from last year. Okay, good to know. Nominations? And people can nominate themselves if they're interested.
Harry, would you be interested in serving again?
I would prefer not to. I know that both Ken and Fareed have served as chair many times over the years, and last year you were interested in getting some new blood into circulation. Evan, are you interested?
I'm not interested. I don't actually know what duties there are in addition to attendance.
Maybe we should talk about that before we jump into nominations.
Yeah, so generally the chair manages the meeting and has a agenda prep meeting with staff to go over upcoming items, to talk about the requests for future agenda items. So time commitment wise, generally it's a meeting in advance of the meeting with staff that we schedule, half hour to an hour. And beyond
That's
that.
usually during business hours, right?
Yep.
Zoom meeting. So the time commitment beyond what we do here at the meeting is just that one additional monthly meeting by Zoom during business hours. And
Occasionally, your presence is needed at a council meeting to explain a decision, or I guess when we did the work plan, but we're not doing that anymore, so
do that anymore.
less of that.
And at the meeting, at the mid-month meeting to plan the agenda, staff has prepared a draft and provided it a day or so before the meeting. So the chair would be looking at a draft produced by staff and commenting on it and maybe requesting additional items or suggesting moving things around in some way. The chair is not expected to come up with the agenda on their own.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can probably manage that time constraint wise. I'm willing to give it a try. I don't know that
nominating
I'm the best
yourself?
candidate, but it sounds like everybody else has done their turn, so I'm happy to do so.
Well, I'll nominate Evan for what it's worth.
I'll second that.
We can take other nominations.
So we call the question.
Okay, so can we take a vote on Evan as chair?
Commissioner Barnes,
Yes.
Commissioner Zavindal, Commissioner McCroskey,
Yes.
Commissioner Pang, Commissioner Vihil McClanahan.
Abstain, I guess.
Vote for yourself.
You're
Vote
allowed
for
to vote.
yourself if you want.
It might look better to vote for yourself.
Yes, I suppose.
Commissioner Von Naedigen,
Yes.
Chair Chomsky.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Would you like to lead the selection of the vice chair?
Sure. Do we have any?
Technically, you're in charge for the rest of the meeting. So.
Okay. Do we have any nominations for vice chair?
I would nominate Leo if he's willing.
I'd just like to know like what the time commitment on that would be as well.
Just make sure Evan show up every time.
It
little.
overlaps with all your AP courses.
If the chair can't make a meeting, you would serve as the chair and manage the meeting. If the chair is recused for an agenda item, you would manage that portion of the meeting.
So the vice chair would attend the mid-month prep meeting in the occasion when the chair has announced they can't make an entire meeting, right?
But pretty rare.
So mentally, anyway, you should sort of bump your hypothetical vacation schedules together because if you both tend to go on vacations at the same time, that could be a problem.
Well, and you're a senior?
Yeah.
Are you expecting to live at home and go to college next year, or
No, for college I'm going to be going in dorms.
at somewhere else?
I'm not sure yet. Yeah.
Right, have you applied to colleges where you would be living in Albany?
Yeah. Living in Berkeley, UC Berkeley.
Close enough. Well,
There's a
well,
requirement.
you have to live here.
There is a requirement, so that would mean that we might have a mid-season replacement, which is not
okay.
unacceptable. I just want to make that explicit.
I'm also not sure how residency works when you're a college student, because many college students are still residents where their parents live and vote there and things like that, right?
right.
It's in the charter somewhere.
Yeah. So, I mean, that would just be a question of whether you'd be eligible to continue on the commission. But so long as you're on the commission, you would be fine to be the vice chair. I don't think it'd be a tremendous burden. And I think, grab the opportunity while you can.
So if we got to mid-year and
Figure it out.
needed a new vice chair, we could just have a brief agenda item to choose a new vice chair.
Correct.
When the time comes.
Yes.
Okay.
I nominate Leo for vice chair.
I'll second.
We have a roll call.
Commissioner Barnes,
Yes.
Commissioner Zavindal,
Aye.
Commissioner McCroskey,
Yes.
Commissioner Chomsky,
Yes.
Commissioner Pang,
Yes.
Commissioner Von Naedigen.
Yes.
So Leo, you're a
Chair Mc-
senior now.
Yeah.
What do they call that second semester year, or second semester of senior year, the senior slump or something like that?
Senioritis.
Senioritis. This will give you
That
something
was
to
back in
do.
our day. Are they still allowed to do that? They
It's different,
cracked down
but
on
it
that
still
now.
exists.
You just can't flunk courses once you've been accepted to
Yep.
Berkeley. They check. Okay, so in case your parents were wondering what you were going to do to occupy yourself, now they know.
All right. So if that's finished, I suppose we go on to point 6, or item 6.
Announcements. I have a few, if I may, Chair. City Council discussed the active transportation plan request for proposals, and just an update, we're preparing to release it shortly. So that is getting going. Another item, AB 2147 is now operative, which is a minor change to the vehicle code, which permits the operator of a bicycle facing a pedestrian walk to proceed across the roadway in the direction of the signal. So it essentially allows the cyclist to take advantage of a lead pedestrian interval where the walk precedes the green for other vehicles. So
So if you're riding a bike and you're stopped at a red light and then you see a walk signal, you can go, you don't have to wait for the green light.
If you're proceeding in the direction, that's, yeah.
I did that tonight on my way here at Marin and San Pablo.
It's a lot, actually.
I have to admit that I've been doing that for, getting across San Pablo is scary in so many different places. But I go to a gym on the other side of San Pablo on Carlson, and it's like always, you just because you go up into the El Cerrito Plaza, and it's like, it's a hill, and it's, you want as much time as you can before people try to get around you to go to Trader Joe's.
I think the goal of the state law was to acknowledge that this is what bike riders do. And it's not dangerous, and it should be officially allowed as opposed to some other bike rider behavior at intersections, which is less clearly safe.
It's a convenience thing, because legally you could already jump off your bike, become a pedestrian, and then walk. It just allows you to stay on your bike.
And it's going to save us money along the greenway, so we don't have to put in cyclist signal heads, right? All right.
Other announcements, we're expecting streetlight guidelines and sidewalk presentation at the next council meeting on February 5th. And AC Transit presentation is scheduled for February 20th council, but may very well change given the direction last night at the board. So those are my announcements.
Okay, do we have, for item 7, do we have any requests for future agenda items?
I'm interested in reviewing parking regulations on Buchanan west of the freeway. That's the waterfront area. Buchanan goes all the way down, yeah.
Right.
There's a high demand, parking at the racetrack is not generally available as it might have been in previous years. And actually I drove by today and the under freeway parking was not open. I don't know if that was a one-day thing.
Is it still 90-minute parking down there?
Yes. There's been some recent changes to signage and striping to reinforce the parking regulations. There was a perception that was taking away parking, but it was just reinforcing.
Well, they should have been doing all along. And most dogs they get bored after 90 minutes. There's something,
It's not just dogs.
I just noticed this, probably in higher income areas out in Marin, there are so many kids on e-bikes going too fast, and I see on the internet now these advertisements on YouTube for e-bikes that can go 45 miles an hour, and Marin, Mill Valley has already struggled with this around their high school. I know this is coming to Albany, and I'm not sure when we should address it or how, but, since some e-bikes are essentially motorcycles, and you do need a separate motorcycle license in the state of California. At some point in the future, we're going to need to discuss, I think, regulating e-bikes, at least Class 3 e-bikes. I just want to give, my sense is that it's coming. It's already there in Marin. It's going to be coming our way too eventually.
I think there are some things we can discuss in terms of setting expectations that could help set the stage for that. That we can do now.
And it might be more of a consumer education thing, the way we, do bicycle safety now. We don't require licenses for bicycles, but e-bikes are just sort of drifting more and more towards being motorcycles. And having had a son who got seriously injured on a motorcycle, I'm just kind of cringing.
It would be good for all of us to familiarize ourselves with the laws and what can and can't be regulated locally.
Yeah, that would be good. I think that's a good suggestion.
Anything else? All right, it looks like the next meeting is on February 22nd. And I think we are adjourned. See you then.